In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a float setup. This float setup will be set up on a spinning reel and not a center pin. This should work for both reels, but some things may be different. I also recommend not using a bait caster or a spin cast reel for a float setup. The first thing I'm going to do is attach my float to my main line, which is 30-pound Power Pro braid. If you're using a center pin, I recommend using 12-pound mono or 15 mono at max. The float I am using is the Raven float, 6.2 grams. And for this float to attach to your line, you'll need 2 tubes. You will need a tube that is 1/16 and 3/32. The thicker tubing goes on the top of the float, and the thinner tubing goes on the bottom of the float, just like this. So grab your main line, put the thicker tubing in, just like that. Then put in your float, like this. It should look something like this. Then pull this line down and attach the thinner tubing to the bottom. Here we go. And then just put in like this. And then put in just like this. Same way as the top tubing. Put your line down. And there is your float attached to your line. Then I like using 3 split shots below the float. Then I'm going to add 3 split shots right below the float, and it should look something like this. But it's very important, if you're using a different float, to look at how much it weighs and use the proper amount of split shots to make it work best. These are the split shots I am using, size 7. You shouldn't want the split shots to touch the float, or the float will be drifting sideways and not straight up. Next step is to add your swivel to your main line to attach your leader. I'm using the extra small Raven swivel. So tie on your swivel to your main line and do a really good knot, because you do not want to break your knot and lose the fish. When done, it should look something like this. Each river, creek, whatever you're fishing has a different setup usually. For my creek, this is what usually works best for me. So this should work for you, but yeah. When it comes to fluorocarbon line, leader line, I recommend for spinning reel, I'd recommend 12 to 15 pound, just to be safe, which is really strong for salmon. And when it comes to center pin, I'd recommend 8 pound to 10 pound. But people do catch them on 4 pound. But if you want to be safe, I'd recommend 8 to 10 pound leader for center pin, and 12 to 15 pound for a spinning reel. And now just attach a really good knot to your swivel. A really good knot, but don't make it too big so it's less visible, but make it good, strong. For float fishing, I recommend using a rod at shortest 9 feet, because you want a longer leader, and you want your leader to at least be 3/4 the length of your rod. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend like a 6 or 7 foot rod. 9 at the minimum, 13 max. The knot on your leader line connected to the swivel can be a little big like this, but the knot on the leader line for the bait should be smaller and less visible. When you're done cutting your leader and measuring it to the length you want, start adding on your bait. For hooks, for salmon, I recommend 10 octopus hook. That's what's been working best for me. And for trout, I'd recommend 12 and 14 octopus hook. Flies like woolly buggers also work really good for salmon and trout. so you don't need an actual hook. You can just attach your fly to your line. It'll work really good. For my salmon bait, I'm using this little fluff ball that's been working really good for me with salmon. I have no clue what the name is. My friend just gave it to me, but it's been working really good. So you don't need like the most detailed thing for salmon. Just something like a row bag, beads, or like woolly buggers will work really good. Here's what my bait looks tied on. The last step for your float setup is one more split shot, size BB, different size, really small. You only need one. You put it above your bait on your leader line. I recommend, no matter how light your bait is, at least 1 foot above your bait. The closer the split shot to your bait, the quicker your bait will sink, and the higher the split shot, the slower your bait will sink. So if you want to slow drift, put your split shot maybe 2-3 feet up. You can always change it and get whatever you want. So here's how my float setup turned out. The main line, the float tubing, the float, the 3 split shots. That can vary the size of the float, remember? If it's bigger, add more weight to make it sink better. The leader, and the small split shot. The closer to your bait, the quicker it sinks. The higher up, the slower it sinks. Your bait. And then your bait.